Tune into ESG Matters with Risk Insights, where we explore ESG with impact.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to ESG Matters with Risk Insights. I'm your host, Anushka Bogdanov. As promised, I'm dissecting Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, specifically Book 2. What struck me was not how philosophical it felt, but how operational, how immediate, and how relevant it is to the turmoil we're living through today. Marcus wrote these reflections as a leader governing an empire under pressure, war at the borders, instability at home, disease, and declining institutional integrity. Book 2 is clear eyed realism, leadership stripped of illusion. And in an era of global disorder, that realism feels urgently needed. Marcus opens Book 2 by preparing himself for the nature of the day ahead. You will encounter arrogance, dishonesty, selfishness, and incompetence. This is not despair, it is risk awareness. In modern terms, Marcus is practicing what we now call enterprise risk culture, the mental posture leaders adopt before strategy, before controls, and before disclosures. Enterprise risk culture does not begin with frameworks or committees. It begins with disciplined judgment. Marcus understands that leadership failure is rarely technical, it is behavioural. And this is the first lesson of Book 2. When leaders lose mastery of themselves, institutions inherit that weakness. A defining theme of Book 2 is restraint. Marcus repeatedly reminds himself not to react emotionally, not to seek validation, and not to confuse authority with entitlement. Stoic leadership is not performative. It is restrained, deliberate, and accountable. Now contrast this with what we increasingly see in modern governance. Leadership by spectacle, decision-making driven by grievance, and emotional signaling replacing rational process. This is not strength, it is volatility. From a risk perspective, populist governance erodes regulatory predictability, institutional trust, and long-term capital confidence. Where Stoic leadership demands humility and restraint, populist governance rewards impulse and confrontation. Marcus understood something timeless. Power without restraint creates instability, not control. Book 2 also confronts a deeper danger, refusal to accept reality. Marcus reminds himself that nature does not negotiate, consequences are indifferent to opinion, and reality asserts itself whether acknowledged or not. This is where Book 2 intersects directly with climate risk denial. Climate risk is not political, it is physical, financial, and systemic. When leaders dismiss climate science or delay action for short-term advantage, they are not exercising sovereignty. They are abandoning rational stewardship. In ESG terms, this results in mispriced risk, stranded assets, and systemic transition shocks. Marcus would have not framed this as ideology. He would have recognized it as a failure of reasoned leadership. This discussion is not about party politics, it is about leadership standards. Measured against the principles of Book 2, current global leadership, particularly in the United States, reveals troubling gaps. Emotional governance replacing disciplined judgment, personal loyalty elevated above institutional duty, and short-term survival prioritized over systemic stability. The consequences are not contained domestically. They spill into global markets, geopolitical alignments, along with climate and sustainability pathways. Marcus wrote, "What harms the whole cannot benefit the part." Leadership failure in a dominant global power becomes systemic risk for the world. Book 2 delivers a sobering insight for modern boards, CEOs, and policymakers. You can implement ESG frameworks, risk committees, and disclosure standards. But if leaders lack self discipline, humility, respect for institutions, and the acceptance of reality, then governance becomes theatre. Enterprise risk culture is not documented, it is embodied, and it is tested most brutally under pressure. Marcus Aurelius never intended for these reflections to be public. They were private reminders written in moments of fatigue, doubt, and responsibility. Perhaps that is why they endure, because every age of turmoil reveals the same truth. The greatest risk is not external disruption, it is the internal failure of leadership. Risk begins in the mind, and when the mind loses discipline, the system follows. Humanity is living in what is now called a polycrisis, not one great shock, but many converging at once. Severe humanitarian emergencies, economic and geopolitical confrontation, escalating climate impacts, and a deep strain on global cooperation. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that we will wake each day to busybody, ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful forces. Not because the world is broken, but because it has always been this way. His counsel is not withdrawal, but to resolve, to meet disorder with integrity, to answer chaos with duty, and to hold fast to reason and compassion even when systems falter. In a world defined by polycrisis, his message is clear. Leadership is not about controlling the storm, but about becoming the calm that others can navigate by. If you found this podcast helpful, please share, like, and subscribe. Don't forget to sign up for the Risk Insights Carbon Training Program, which begins in March 2026 from beginner to advanced level. Thank you for listening to ESG Matters with Risk Insights. Until next time, lead with restraint, reason, and responsibility. Ciao for now.